Far to the west of here, across the mighty sea,
And just across that sea,
there's a place few have seen. It's called Vinland.
I know what's waiting across the sea now. It's our enemies.
Eren Yeager and Thorfinn Karlsefni are characters born from grief, shaped by violence that they never asked for, yet couldn't escape. As children, they were powerless, and as men, they became weapons. Revenge carved out their identities, and hatred offered them purpose when nothing else could. But revenge has a cost. It eats away at you slowly, demanding everything while offering nothing in return. And when the dust finally settles, you're left with a question far more terrifying than just what now? You're left asking, who am I without all this hate? Vinland Saga and Attack on Titan both explore the cycle of violence, the myth of justice through power, and the temptation to become the very thing that you once feared. Yet, what makes their stories so compelling isn't just how similar they are, but how different that they end. Because where Thorfinn broke the cycle, Eren became the cycle. So, the single question that I'll try to answer throughout this video is this: how can two people who have walked the same path and shouldered the same pain still arrive in opposite destinations? And of course, there's gonna be spoilers ahead. Some stories begin with fire, others with silence. For Eren Yeager and Thorfinn Karlsefni, their stories begin in the hush before the storm. Two boys living in peace, untouched by the cruelty that will later define them. They are not born warriors, nor are they born broken. Instead, they were born into carefully sheltered corners in collapsing worlds. Thorfinn lived in Iceland, an island at the edge of history, far removed from the blood-stained shores of mainland Europe. His life was quiet, isolated, almost serene. He ran through snow-covered fields, played with his friends, and listened to countless stories of distant lands. One story in particular involved Vinland, a peaceful land far across the sea, a land without violence, a land with just peace and prosperity. Thorfinn was the son of Thors, a man once renowned as the strongest Viking warrior alive. Now, a farmer who refuses to speak of war. To Thorfinn, his father is a myth come alive. Not a man who fled the battlefield, but one who outgrew it. He doesn't see pacifism, he sees restraint. He doesn't yet know the difference. And then there's Eren, who grew up behind the towering stone walls of Shiganshina. Titans roamed the world outside, but to him, they were just legends. Distant, distorted monsters. In his eyes, the walls that protected him were just prison bars. And Eren, even as a child, yearns to be free. Where Thorfinn looks up to his father, Eren looks outward, to the sea, the mountains, and the world itself. He believed it's all waiting for him. He imagines a life where he's more than just a cog in a machine, where he's a hero, a liberator, someone who matters, a scout. Thorfinn, on the other hand, had dreams of becoming a Viking warrior. Both boys carried dreams too large for the small worlds that they lived in. These were not just idle fantasies, they are spiritual anchors, visions of a future where the world is fair, and where they are powerful enough to shape it. But the worlds they inhabit are not fair. They're not gentle, and when it arrives, when violence finally knocks, it does not do so with ceremony. It comes fast, brutally, and unforgiving. Eren's world ended in a single afternoon. The wall was breached. Titans poured into the city like a biblical flood. Eren ran through fire and smoke trying to reach his home, but when he did, it was already too late. Eren's mother was already crushed beneath the rubble, and when the smiling Titan towered over him and his friends, Eren begged. He screamed, but all he could do was watch as his mom was lifted and devoured, all while a soldier carried him away like a child too young to understand what death even is. But he did understand, more than anyone realizes, and this was when Eren Yeager stood up, looked to the distance, and made a vow. I'll kill them all. Every last one. His words were jagged, immediate, but they were not the cries of a child who has just witnessed death. They are something far colder, something calcifying. In that moment, Eren didn't just mourn his mother, he condemns her killers. He doesn't grieve, he swore vengeance. Not against the specific titan that took her, but against every titan that exists. It's a terrifying transformation because it's so instinctive. His innocence didn't just erode, it exploded, and the boy who once dreamed of freedom now found freedom in death indistinguishable. The Titans didn't just kill his mother, they destroyed his dream of the world, and he swore that he'd return the favor on every last one of them. On the other hand, Thorfinn's world died in the deck of a boat. He travels with his father, stowing away for the chance to witness glory in action. Thor's had been called back to war, but not because he wanted to fight, but because the world refused to forget him. It sent mercenaries, traps, and eventually, it sent Askeladd. Unlike Eren's tragedy, Thorfinn's unfolds like a betrayal. His father is not overpowered, he is not devoured by beasts, he's killed because he chooses not to kill. In a duel he wins, Thor throws away his sword and offers his life to save his son. And that's the part that truly broke Thorfinn. Not the death, but the choice. Because Thorfinn doesn't understand. His dream of warriorhood is rooted in strength, in honor, in righteous power. But Thor saw further. He knew what killing did to a man's soul, and in refusing to fight, he gives his son a lesson the boy is too young to grasp. That true strength lies not in vengeance, but in restraint. Thorfinn, however, was too young to learn that lesson, because that night he stood at the edge of a boat that once was his, and he screamed out to Askeladd and his crew, "How dare you kill my father? I'm going to kill you, no matter what." Like Eren, he didn't just mourn, he reacts. He replaces grief with fury, love with hatred. He's not just angry that Thor's is dead, he's enraged that someone took him, that someone reduced his father to a casualty. And in Askeladd, he finds a shape for that anger, a villain, a goal, a reason to keep living. And this is where their stories truly began, not in the fields of Iceland or in the walls of Shiganshina, but in the moment when the world snaps in half and they must choose how to fill the void. They don't process their pain, they weaponize it. Grief doesn't just become healing, it becomes a lens, a way to see the world as enemy territory. And through that lens, they are always victims, always justified. What begins as reactive becomes preemptive, and what begins as personal becomes global. This isn't character development, it's spiritual corrosion. They believe, deeply and sincerely, that the world can only be made whole if they first break the world. For Thorfinn and Eren, revenge began as a promise, a burst of rage spoken in the fire of loss. But in time, those promises became identities. The world stopped being a place full of people, it became a battlefield, and everyone on it was either an obstacle or a target. In that way, both boys stopped growing. They aged, they fought, they bled, but they didn't truly live. They lost their childhood to a god neither of them believed in, and spent the rest of their days trying to rewrite the terms of that loss with blood. Eren joined the Scouts to fulfill his vow. On the surface, it was about saving humanity, becoming a soldier, protecting the people inside the walls. But under that, buried beneath the slogans and uniforms, was a more selfish truth. Eren wanted revenge. He wanted power, not just the power to kill titans, but the power to undo helplessness. Every decision he made after that was sharpened against the memory of his mother being devoured. His entire worldview now filtered through the idea that freedom is only earned through force. He saw enemies everywhere. Titans, cowards, comrades who didn't fight hard enough, commanders who hesitated. Even Armand and Mikasa, the friends closest to him, failed to meet the purity of his fury. Over and over again, he was betrayed, not just in battle, but ideologically. He watched as people chose compromise, diplomacy, caution, but Eren didn't want a negotiation. He wanted justice. And if justice had to come through annihilation, then so be it. Each battle and each betrayal deepened the trench in his mind. He wasn't just fighting titans anymore, he was fighting a world that allowed them to exist. A world that devoured the weak and rewarded the passive. The more he fought, the more he burned. And the more he burned, the less he resembled the boy who once stood behind the walls and dreamed of the ocean. Thorfinn's descent was quieter, more suffocating. After his father's death, he joined Askeladd's band, not as a warrior, but as a weapon. He killed for Askeladd not because he believed in the cause, but because he was buying duels. Each kill was a coin, each mission a down payment, and if he served well enough, he'd be given another chance to avenge his father. And so he fought, and killed, and waited, and waited. Years passed. His body matured, but his soul did not. He was still the boy on the boat, frozen in that moment of grief and rage. He didn't smile, he didn't speak unless it was to insult or threaten. He was merely forced to live among the men that he fought besides. He was forced to eat with them, to sleep with them, and to dream with them. Where Eren's rage was explosive, Thorfinn's was glacial, slow, heavy, and inescapable. But both were trapped in that same prison. Both believed that their pain was sacred, that their suffering was righteous, and that if they could just kill the right person, the world would make sense again. This is where their symmetry becomes haunting, because they weren't simply affected by the cycle of hatred, they became it. Eren's hatred spreads like a wildfire. At first, he hated the Titans. Then, when he learned the truth, that Titans are actually humans, that Marleyans created them, that the real enemy is across the sea, his hate expands. It evolves, but it never disappears. It simply shifts targets. The shape of his enemy changes, but his mission doesn't. In his mind, the only way to break the cycle is to finish it, not with forgiveness, but with fire. Thorfinn too saw the world collapse, but for him, it didn't happen with a revelation, it happened with a death. When Askeladd is killed, not by Thorfinn's hand, but someone else's, everything unravels. His revenge, his purpose, his entire reason for existing vanishes in an instant. The hatred that fueled him for years evaporates, and all that's left is a boy who has no idea who he is. It is, in many ways, the second death of Thorfinn. Because hatred is easy, it's simpler than grief, easier than healing. It gives you something to do, someone to blame. It gives a direction. But once it's gone, what really remains? Eren, by contrast, doesn't lose his purpose, he only adds to it. Where Thorfinn was emptied out by the loss of revenge, Eren was inflated by it. As he learned more about Marley, about the Eldians, and about the truth of the world, his fire doesn't extinguish, it amplified. His goals became larger, his convictions sharper, and what began as revenge became revolution. What began as kill all titans became make the world pay for what it did to us. But behind that expansion is the same boy, the same grief, the same refusal to mourn. This is what makes these two characters mirror images, because even as their ideologies shift, the fuel remains the same. They are boys who lost everything, and built their identities around what they would destroy to get it back. But hatred cannot create, it can only consume. And that's why, eventually, their roads begin to part. Thorfinn, emptied of revenge, begins to feel the unfamiliar weight of freedom. He doesn't want to kill anymore, he doesn't even want to fight. What he wants is something he doesn't know how to name, something quieter than vengeance, something harder than battle. He begins to think not about who he hates, but about who he wants to be. And Eren? Well, he looked out across the sea and saw his enemy. Thorfinn looked out across the ocean and saw a future. This is the point of divergence, the axis on which their mirrored journeys begin to spin in opposite directions. Two boys, same pain, same loss, same fire, but only one of them wants to escape the flames. Only one of them learned that peace can be more powerful than revenge. There's something tragic about potential left to rot, about two lives that began in warmth, only to walk opposite ends of the same knife. The difference in Eren and Thorfinn's journey is not in what they lost, but in what they became once that loss hollowed them out. Because grief is not neutral. It either softens you or hardens you. And Thorfinn became hardened, but Eren chose to become unbreakable. The rumbling wasn't just a tragic necessity. It wasn't a last resort. It was the culmination of everything Eren had become. It was what he wanted. A child who once cried out in rage at the death of his mother now stood out at the edge of the world as a god of annihilation, watching as the world was reduced to dust beneath his feet. He claimed it was for Eldia, that he was doing it so that Armin and Mikasa could live long lives under the sun, that he would bear the weight of genocide so others didn't have to. But these were masks, pretty lies wrapped in rhetoric, because beneath it all, Eren wasn't fighting for peace, he was fighting for revenge. What people fail to grasp is that Eren couldn't stop the rumbling, not because of destiny, or because he was backed into a corner, but because on some level, he didn't want to stop the rumbling. He wanted to see the world burn. He wanted retribution, not justice, but vengeance. The same boy who once looked at the ocean with wonder, now stared at it with hatred, seeing not a symbol of possibility, but a barrier between him and the enemy. The line between child and monster had blurred long ago. Eren didn't just become the cycle of hatred, he made it divine. This wasn't about survival, it was about reversal. Eren had suffered, and now the world would suffer too. Every child, every mother, and every home beyond the shores of Paradis would feel what he felt that day in Shiganshina. And as the world trembled beneath a million titanic footsteps, Eren told himself it was freedom. Meanwhile, on another shore, far from the noise of thunderous genocide, Thorfinn was learning to live. After Askeladd's death, he lost everything. His purpose, his direction, his very reason for existing was gone. And so, the boy who once screamed revenge into the wind became a silent shadow, empty and lost. He was sold into slavery, forced to toil in the dirt, broken in body and spirit. For the first time, Thorfinn had no enemy to kill, no duel to earn, no death to avenge, just days, just silence. And that silence became his mirror. For the first time, he was forced to listen to the wind and to the soil and to the echoes of the people he'd killed. Every night they came in his dreams. Pause. Faces he couldn't forget, names that he never learned. They weren't demons, just people. People with lives, families, fears, just like him. And somewhere in that quiet torment, he remembered. He remembered his father's words. You have no enemies. No one has any enemies. A philosophy so absurd, so naive, that it might have sounded like madness to the boy Thorfinn had once been. But now, after a lifetime of killing, it began to take root. Because Thors hadn't been trying to pacify his son, he was trying to save him. That one sentence, spoken long before Thorfinn could understand it, became a seed. And now, decades later, in the ashes of vengeance, it began to bloom. And with it came a vow. Thorfinn, once a machine of war, swore never to harm another soul, not out of cowardice, but out of clarity. He had seen what violence did, what revenge stole. He had lived in a world where hatred passed down like inheritance, and he refused to continue the bloodline. While Eren marched forward with destruction, Thorfinn stepped backward into stillness. Eren's freedom was paved in bones. Thorfinn's freedom was built on forgiveness. It is here, in this divergence, that we see the true weight of their journeys. One lost his humanity, and the other gained it. One became the cycle of hatred, and the other chose to break it. And if we want to understand how two boys who started the same ended so differently, then we must go back to the beginning, to their childhoods. When Thorfinn first showed signs of aggression, it was Thors who knelt before him, not with scolding, but with something gentler. He told his son that he has no enemies, that no one has enemies, that war was a lie, that a true warrior needs no sword. It was a philosophy spoken quietly, but its ripple reached decades into the future. Now contrast that with Eren. When Eren, a child burning with curiosity and restlessness, declared his intention to join the Scouts, his father didn't intervene. Grisha simply turned to Karla and said, "Mere words won't hold back the boy's curiosity." But curiosity wasn't all Eren had. He had rage, he had darkness, and he had no one who challenged it, no one to kneel beside him and offer a different truth. Imagine, just for a moment, if these quotes were reversed. If Grisha had knelt beside Eren and whispered, "You have no enemies." Maybe, just maybe, Eren would have questioned his anger instead of feeding it. Maybe he would have seen the outside world not as a battlefield, but as a place of wonder. Maybe he would have never gone back to Shiganshina, never opened the basement, never set the rumbling in motion. Maybe the cabin in his dreams, the one where Mikasa cooked and birds flew overhead, could have become more than a fantasy. It could have been home. And what if Thors had said nothing? If he had never planted that moral seed in Thorfinn? Maybe Thorfinn would have kept killing. Maybe he would have died with blood on his hands, never realizing how much of himself that he had lost. Maybe he would have become another Escalade, another link in the chain. Of course, we know Eren was the one manipulating Grisha from the future, and that his path, in many ways, was set in motion before he could even choose it. But this isn't about timelines, it's about the soul, and what these imagined swaps reveal is something deeper. That sometimes a single sentence, one not understood at the time, can become the axis on which an entire life turns. For Thorfinn, "You have no enemies" was a rope, something to cling to when the tide of hatred threatened to drown him. For Eren, the absence of that rope meant he learned to swim in fire. So in the end, what are we left with? One who burned the world so that he could be free, and another who freed himself so that he wouldn't burn the world. One whose trauma hollowed him out until he became a monster, and another whose trauma humbled him until he became a man. One who said, "I will kill every last one of them," and the other who said, "I will never hurt anyone again." It's easy to say that Eren is the product of fate, of inevitability, of a cursed history no one could escape. And in many ways, that's true. But that's what makes Thorfinn's story all the more powerful, because he did escape. He saw the cycle for what it was, and he walked away. And that is what makes these two characters two sides of the same coin. Not because of what they lost, but because of what they chose to become after the loss.